Welcome to Hot Topics in International Trade, brought to you by Braumiller Law Group and Braumiller Consulting Group.
Hi, this is Bob Brewer with Braumiller Law Group and Braumiller Consulting Group. Welcome to the podcast with me once again. Hey, you haven't seen you for a while. Robert Stein, VP of Braumiller Consulting Group. How you been?
I feel great. It's good to be seen. And boy, are these some exciting times we are living through when it comes to tariffs and everything else that's going on.
You're like the sixth podcast I've done this morning, just so you know. Now, you're probably curious, all right, who stopped by, Bob? Well, Adrian just got through talking about Section 301 investigations and how that's going to fill a gap the government hopes from IEPA. Brandon stopped by and did an update on IEPA. So I know that you had some input on just what the heck IEPA's done with the FTZ. Robert's my FTZ guru. So a lot of these things that he's talking about, we're talking about now with IEPA and the investigations. What the heck's going on with the FTZs and with the tariffs out there? What's the landscape right now look like, Robert?
Right. So now that the really, really smart people have come in and talked about the legality and the technical stuff, I'm the lunch bucket guy, right? I'm the FTZ guy. I'm here to say, okay, how can companies really cope with all this? So let me just talk a little bit about how FTZs have been impacted since the strike down of IEPA tariffs by the Supreme Court. And there was a lot of concern because there were all these goods in FTZs and what we call privileged foreign status. And these are goods that were given a privilege date before February 24th, which technically meant they were locked into paying the IEPA tariffs. But of course, the whole irony of that is that there was nobody else paying IEPA tariffs. So there was this confusion about, like, what do people with zones do with all those goods, this inventory with millions of dollars of liability? And as it turns out, Customs did actually program a solution. And this is one of the strangest things I may have seen Customs do in my entire career, which, by the way, is not short, right? 37 years of doing this. Mm-hmm. And for the first time, Customs programmed a solution where FTZs could file their entries, even with goods that were privileged before February 24th, and not pay the IEPA tariffs. And here's what they did that was so different. They didn't issue any guidance. There's no formal guidance. So really all we have is sort of the internal guidance they gave from, to the field offices about how this should be applied. And that's not officially public, but Customs did tell the trade, hey, there is internal guidance there that we're not collecting these IEPA tariffs on privileged foreign goods and FTZs. So that was really good. But now there's a lot of confusion about, like, how do those Section 122 tariffs apply? And what's going to happen if it turns out that those 122s are struck down? So there's a lot of uncertainty. But one thing that we know for sure is that, at least in the case of where tariffs are being struck down, if you have goods in a zone, it looks like, just as an example, let's say you set up an FTZ and you put goods in that are subject to Section 122 or other tariffs that may be struck down in court. So I don't know if Brandon talked about the legality of the new Section 301 and the possibility the Supreme Court might rule on those as well. But let's assume that some of these tariffs get struck down. It looks like people who set up FTZs are still going to have that capability to take advantage of those lower rates. So that was a big concern. A lot of people are like, hey, I put my goods in the zone, and now they're stuck at that rate. But it looks like, hey, if it's illegal, it's illegal, and Customs are going to work to program accordingly. Right. So the FTZ is still a great way, along with bonded warehouses, right, to try to find refuge from the variability of what's going on, right? The big thing that I talk about now is strategic sourcing, how companies used to take 3 to 6 months to plan out their supply chains. And you can't really count on things being the same in 3 to 6 months. 3 months ago, who would have thought we'd be at war with Iran and oil prices would be higher, right? So, this is where we're at in the world. This is the new normal is change. And so FTZs continue to be, and like you said, I'm the guru. I'm the guy who's a champion of FTZs. I want people to put, set these things up, take advantage of them, protect their businesses a little bit from that variability, to have the mechanisms to, even if new tariffs come in and you have to pay them, you don't have to pay them immediately, right? The FTZ gives you that opportunity to bring the stuff in and hold it in your warehouse and not pay the duty until you sell the goods. So
And even Section 122, that goes away in what, I think July? Yeah, that's only 150 days max. And they can't put that back in place. Adrian covered a lot of this too with some of the states that are suing. I mean, it's the investigations on 301. We talked a lot about that, but you're right. I mean, this IEPA thing's it's huge, absolutely huge. And we were looking at basically how in the system with Kate meets Ace, how that's going to kind of pan out. And that's a big thing. But the FTZs, I mean, you and I have been on a lot of calls over the past, just 3-4 months alone.
Right.
I mean, those things that
no, I mean, I just wanted to mention, like, there's a lot of other stuff going on with FTZs. Like, I know there is a big push to deal with this whole issue of USMCA duty deferral. Like this issue where zones who used to be able to, people who had a zone could manufacture in the zone, and then they could invert tariffs, and that would make them more competitive with, especially in North America, with Canadian and Mexican manufacturers, but also would make them more competitive with manufacturers in Europe and China, because you could take advantage of this duty inversion to make something and pay the same duty rate anyone else would in terms of when you bring it into the US. Or in the case of sending it to Mexico or in Canada, we had the same disadvantage as Canada and Mexico with deferral. What I mean by deferral is you lose that duty-free status when you manufacture in the US on stuff that's dutiable and then ship it to a USMCA country. Now, the Mexicans have found a really cool way to stay within the rules of USMCA, but still not pay duty on their stuff that they manufacture in the IMEX. And that's PROSEC, right? PROSEC, I'm sure Brenda has talked about it in the past, but PROSEC is just a way to get duty-free handling of the inputs. And that bypasses the USMCA duty deferral rules. If the inputs are duty-free and the final product is duty-free, you're home free, right?
Yep.
I should make a t-shirt that says that.
Yeah.
Right. And then Canada has Canada has a similar program where there's ways that they make the inputs duty free. The United States doesn't. We have all these tariffs and everything has to go into the zone and PF status. So without getting into the weeds, I know that NAFTZ, the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones, near and dear to my heart, they have been working with Congress. There is a big push now with this renegotiation or revisitation of USMCA to make sure that whatever agreement, trilateral agreement like USMCA, bilateral agreement just with Mexico and Canada, maybe, hopefully, but to try to get language in there that fixes this USMCA duty deferral that's been around since the days of NAFTA. Like this started in NAFTA, 1994, right? Mm-hmm. So far ago, I might have still had hair. So the idea here is there are changes coming, and I think we're finally gaining traction in Congress. I think there's an understanding that there's an inherent unfairness to FTZs, especially to people who manufacture in FTZs. Because if you don't manufacture an FTZ, you don't have to worry about this craziness. Mm-hmm. But this is something that I'm hoping, right? Melissa Ehrman, who is a big advocate with NAFTZ, and she's quoted in some of the releases that have come out recently. She is pushing so hard along with the rest of that organization to really make it possible so that you can not only take advantage of FTZ to defer duties into the US, to avoid duties on goods you export or destroy or scrap, but you'll actually be able to start manufacturing again and take advantage of US workers and US factories and that pay US taxes. And that's really what we want. The FTZ program is all about growing US business and keeping jobs in the US. So I'm really excited about that. And while there's no news yet, I would say that if people are excited by this idea, they should speak to their congressional representatives, talk to your senators, talk to your House reps, make sure that they understand that this either affects you now or you're considering bringing more jobs in and manufacturing here, but you need this benefit of not being penalized under USMCA with the deferral rules.
Okay.
And if you have more questions about USMCA duty deferral, you should definitely reach out to me.
Well, let's talk about that. We got like 5 minutes left. And I think, when a lot of these leads, as you know, on FTCs come into my inbox and I kind of, pick them out of you and say, here's what they're looking for. They have questions about what part do you actually play? in helping me get set up with an FTZ. And this is no small endeavor, but kind of give us the checklist of here's how this goes from the time it comes into Bob's inbox. He pings me, we set up the meeting, and this is what it's going to take.
Right. So it can go a couple different ways. A lot of times we start off with a simple calculator, right? How are you doing with just a calculator? What kind of money can you save? We sometimes do a feasibility study, which is a more in-depth and time-consuming process of making sure you're going to get the best benefit. But let's assume that you clear all those hurdles, right? And you're like, yeah, let's go. How can Robert and Braumiller work with us to set up an FTZ? We are there from you from beginning to end. It's turnkey, right? From the time that you have to go to the grantee and customs for those first steps, to the application through the grantee to the FTZ board for things like boundary modifications, to establish a zone if you need to, asking for production authority if you need it from the FTZ board, working with customs to activate you, creating things like FTZ compliance manuals, helping you select software, implement and integrate, troubleshoot, look at your inventory, evaluate your business process, make the necessary changes. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things, and we do all of that. And we have not just the skill as consultants, but as people who understand how business works. And this is fundamentally important, Bob. If people come in and they don't understand how your business works, they can say things like, oh, we'll just change your whole manufacturing process and that'll fix the whole problem. But that's not realistic for most businesses, right? So you have to really understand how businesses do inventory, do manufacturing, do shipping and receiving. And we know that. And we can really make sure that that FTZ process, when you're ready to go, that your business is ready for it. And it'll be as smooth as possible to make that transition. So it's not a shock to the system.
Yeah. And Rod, I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, he's been jumping on a lot of planes lately and actually going out to these sites. Well, that's good of you to do that. I mean, right there, boots on the ground. You get that aspect of it too. Yeah, you do.
You got to see it. You got to see it, what the security looks like. You got to see if the facility is secure enough to satisfy customs. So there's a lot that goes into this, and there's no replacement for being there and seeing the facility and talking to the people and getting a sense if the corporate culture is ready for the level of compliance and the level of risk that's involved in an FTZ. It's a different world, right? It's not a completely new world, but it's different, and you'd have to be ready.
Yeah. Well, Robert, I like to keep these to about 15 minutes, and we've already spent our 15 minutes. I really appreciate you stopping by, giving us a landscape with FTZs and the tariffs and more tariffs that we're experiencing. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Robert Stein, he's the VP of Braumiller Consulting, and I appreciate you stopping by, man.
Thanks for having me, man. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.